grabbed the podium and then changed my mind. I leaned over to my wife right after we finished singing the second verse. We were in the chorus, and I said, "Did we just sing verse 2 or verse 3? And she looked at me and kind of shrugged, and then we started verse 3, and she leaned over and said, "Verse 2. And then she leaned over and said, "This is why they call me a helpmate." Which is funny, because what we're talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about marriage tonight, so if any of you could give me a ride home, I would appreciate it. I do not like speaking about this topic. I think it's necessary. I think it's important we talk about it as a church. If I knew there was a time my wife was out of town, that's the time I would choose to do it. But we've been talking about family throughout this month. Last time we talked about kind of family in general. This week we talk about marriage. Thorne, is the area wide next week when you guys are gone? No? Oh, man, I wish I'd timed that better. Kids is next week. I thought maybe my kids would be gone and I would have timed that one really well. But we'll talk about kids some next time and kind of work our way through the whole family. But tonight we'll talk about marriage, and I thought we'll do this kind of in two segments. The first part will look a little more closely at what the Bible says about marriage and relationship stuff, and then maybe toward the end a little bit of practical things about what we might do to make our marriages better, and I'll be taking notes as well during all that. Marriage between a man and a woman is the central social building block in every human society without exception. Now, this is probably not quite as popular an idea nowadays, but this is true. And if you look through all societies in history, kind of the building block of all of that has always been marriage. Now, this is not to lessen any who are not married. Paul made it very clear that that is an option and a very good option for some. And I know for some, too, it is an option that you have been given not by choice, and I understand that as well. But for those who are married, we can see that this is an important part of history, at least in part because it's God's design, which really makes a lot of sense as to why this would continue to come up in every society over the course of history. God designed us to be this way. And there's just something about design that as much as we may try to escape it, it's always there. As much as you may want to do things in a different way, make something do something that it's not designed to do, that design always kind of makes itself clear. And so God designed people for marriage. All the way back in Genesis chapter 2. It says that the Lord said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him." And if you remember, I had to go back through all my folders on the computer and figure out when we talked about marriage last. It was July 12th of last year. We talked about it in the course of, we had a series of 5 things that were things we wanted to recapture from the first century church, and that was one of those things, our view of marriage and sexuality and that kind of stuff. And we talked about this then, the idea of the word helper. We struggle with that word nowadays because it seems like servant almost, doesn't it? It seems like lesser, it seems like one is above and one is below. And yet biblically the word helper is not that. The word helper biblically is more of a complement kind of a thing. And when you look throughout Scripture, one thing that will really emphasize that for us is we see God and the Spirit both referred to as a helper. And so if it's a lesser thing, if it's a servitude kind of thing, I don't think we would find God and the Spirit both referred to in that way. So let's get out of our minds for a minute as we look at Genesis 2 that this means one is above and one is below, one is more and one is less. There is this complementary relationship. And you'll notice when God describes this in Genesis 2 that loneliness is the first thing that God says is not good. People are designed to live in community because God is in community. We try to explain the idea of the Trinity. I still think this is probably one of the hardest things in the Bible to explain, to come up with a perfect analogy for, but God has always been together with the Son and the Spirit. The Son has always been together with the Father and the Spirit. There is this community among them. So when He designs man in the same way. Man is intended to live not alone, but together in community. And the closest bond of community that He comes up with is marriage. And so in verse 23, he says, "The man said, 'This is at last bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.'" And you'll notice here the word leave. That can be a word that can be kind of harsh sometimes. If we are with someone and things are going along and you just tell whoever that person is, "Okay, it's time for you to leave." We don't think of that in a very friendly way, do we? Maybe it's they've worn out their welcome. Maybe you're just ready to be by yourself again, whatever it is. And you're in some kind of context with people and you say to leave, it seems kind of harsh. And it's important for us, I think, here to see that when there is this new relationship, there is also a leaving of an old that goes on. Now, I looked at this point many times during the week and thought to myself, do I really want to say this? Because everybody here is related, and all of your parents and grandparents are all here, and I don't want to upset them or anything like that. But it's important for us to realize that these relationships we have when marriage comes along begin to shuffle a little bit. And that one that was the closest relationship is now beginning to change as another relationship becomes even closer. Jesus describes this too in Matthew 19 as he talks about marriage. He says, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." So what we have now is the strongest human bond described in Scripture. I know there is a strong bond between God and his creation and between the people longing for God and him. I understand there is a strong bond between parents and children and grandparents and grandchildren. And sometimes even among friends, there are really strong bonds. But the idea of just the two becoming one is the strongest bond you can think of. And think of in terms of other things in our world. When two things become one thing, most of the things that I will assemble, if I'm assembling something at my house, are put together with, we actually have got a coffee table and an end table during COVID time. And they came in a box, because I'm cheap. They came in a box to our house, and they came with bolts and nuts and the magical Allen wrench. And I would put those things together, and they would go together. But because of that Allen wrench, if for some reason I decided I don't want this thing to be together anymore, then all I've got to do is reverse everything I did before, and it's back apart again. Now, if you think instead in terms of something that you have glued together, something you have welded together, some kind of really good epoxy has brought together, it's a bond that is intended to be a little more permanent. And so here we see a human relationship that is not intended to stop. It's intended to go on and on and on. And we know enough in our world to understand that doesn't always happen. And sometimes situations go out of our control and we don't have a choice in that. But this bond is something that is intended to go on. And so because of that, there has to be some care in how it's done. Have you ever super glued something and not been cautious when you were doing it? And found very quickly, either it's on your hand, or we've seen that thing online not too long ago, for those of you who are online, of someone who decided to use, was it super glue on her hair? There are all kinds of things that people will do with that, but if you don't do it just right, at just the right time and just the right place, what you will find is a bond that's not what you were looking for. And so if we are going to have this bond where two things become one, then we have to be very intentional about how we do it and take every caution to make sure we're doing it in the right way. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, the wise man says, "Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone?" And so here we have the idea that it is better somehow. It's more within the design that God has made that we can find a way to be together. And that once that bond has been made, that bond continues. And in Proverbs 31, "An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain." She is more precious than jewels. And for us, maybe that's not something that we think a whole lot about. This is my jewel. It's the only one I've got. I'm not a jewelry kind of guy. I don't have a lot of other things. And this is precious to me because of what it represents, but the fact that I guess it's not a jewel, it's gold, but it's in that same category in my mind at least. In Bible times, the idea of jewels was a very precious, valuable, important thing, and still is to some degree in our times. But a good wife, more precious than that. And for those of us who feel like we have that, we fully understand what God means when he says this. And then in Ephesians 5, we referenced this a little bit last time, but this will bring us into what we're going to talk about tonight. "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives shall submit to husbands in everything they do to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So all of this is built around love. And not the kind of love that so often our world looks at and says is love, which is a love where you're looking for something for yourself in the midst of it. It is a love that is selfless. Christ's love for the church is a selfless, sacrificial kind of love. And so when Paul says to us here in Ephesians 5 that all of this is built around the love that you have for one another, we can see the kind of relationship this should be, one that is constantly looking to the interests of the other person above ourselves. Now, the struggle is when you are together with that one person, that frequently selflessness does not always come to the surface quite as quickly as you'd like it to. And selfishness instead finds its way there. I, during my time in college, went through 4 or 5 roommates, and I don't know what was wrong with all those people, that they just couldn't get along, and somewhere along the line, it hit me that maybe I'm just kind of hard to live with, and I need to think about this, and I like things a certain way, and certain things I don't like that way, and so because of that, it can be a struggle for me to leave that stuff behind and to not do those things. And for each of us, we probably have moments of struggle that are like that, where we want something, we don't see eye to eye, and so sometimes we just try to force our way through. But if we are building on selfless love, like Christ had for the church, then we don't operate in that way. And then again, in Matthew 18, again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth without anything they ask, about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. So the other thing we're seeking in this, beyond love and selflessness and all of those things, is some level of agreement. Do 2 walk together unless they have agreed to meet? We want to be people who agree. And for a lot of us, agreement is probably a fairly regular thing. But unfortunately, it's not always. Even the best relationships among us, the marriages that we look to as an example, I would imagine occasionally, when you're not here and we're not seeing you, you may disagree about something at least once or twice a year, right? There are these little times here and there where you just don't quite see eye to eye. And what do you do with that? In Song of Solomon, this is one of the tame ones, by the way, don't panic. In Song of Solomon, chapter 2 and verse 14, it says, "O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crannies of the cliff, let me see your face, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom." Now, a lot of imagery here, but the idea of these little foxes that are destroying things is kind of the little disagreements, the regular disagreements that will come along. I don't know what those are for you, but I would imagine all of us have those somewhere along the way. Things that are just, maybe sometimes they're funny if you can step back and laugh at them long enough, or maybe sometimes they are just like that constant, that hangnail on your nail. And you just can't quite get it right, and it just keeps pulling away and keeps bothering you. That paper cut on your finger in the days of COVID and hand sanitizer, which is the worst time to have one. And it just keeps irritating. Sometimes in our relationships, we have those kind of disagreements. And you try, and you want to resolve, and you want to let go of it, and yet you keep finding yourself drawn back into it. And as those things take root, they make us a little more bitter and a little less satisfied, and we find ourselves frustrated and disappointed and just wishing things would be different. And then in Ephesians chapter 5, where we'll draw this together, and I believe we will find the key to marriage, and it's one of the keys we talked about last July. "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife." We've heard this 3 times now in 3 different places. Old Testament, words of Jesus, now the writings of Paul. "And the 2 shall become one flesh. The mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." And what we talked about last July, and where we're going to kind of get rolling here tonight, is love and respect. Everything in marriage seems to come back to these 2 things. And it also shows a little bit about how we're built differently as men and women, and we think differently as men and women, because there is that command here to love and the command to respect. Husbands love and wives respect. And again, within our culture nowadays, those seem like words that are not equal in ways that we don't like. Respect almost seems like something that again, is an above and below kind of thing. Who do you respect? Your superiors. Who do you respect? People that are in charge of you or have authority over you. And when we see that within a marriage, we don't like to look at it in that way. And yet we're called to husbands love, wives respect. So how do we go about doing this? I forgot to put the slide in the slideshow, but I want to bring the book over and show you. It's a book called Love and Respect, and it is by Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. He and his wife wrote this, and they do a lot of marriage seminars all around. And they kind of centered in on this same idea, which is the core of marriage is love and respect. And the reason so many people struggle in marriage is because they struggle with love and respect. And the reason so many marriages end before we have made it through life is because we lack that love and that respect. So we should ask ourselves today, how am I doing? Let's not assume for just a moment that this is all about some other couples. You have that moment where you're thinking, man, I wish so-and-so was here to hear this because they really need to hear that. Just for a moment, we'll step back and assume there are things we can all learn from this. I know I can. How am I doing? And I think we can find the answer to this question through the answers to several other questions. First of all, for husbands, for the men among us, is what I'm about to say or do going to feel unloving? I don't think we usually analyze to this level before we talk. Or if you do, come train me because I need some help. I am more of like the Apostle Peter in the conversation, where oftentimes that thing that has come to my mind, before it is even fully formed in my mind, it will begin to come out of my mouth and I will say it, and I'll realize very quickly that I've made a mistake. What if I instead were to ask this question? This thing that I'm about to say or do, could this come across, even if I don't think it is, even if I don't see it that way, could it come across as unloving? Or for wives, is what I'm about to say or do going to feel disrespectful? And again, terminology we don't often use, especially in our day and time, because we don't think in these terms. But could the thing I'm going to say come across in a way that is disrespectful? So what does that look like? How often do we make cutting remarks that we follow up with a just kidding or a laugh or a smile, or we think it's kind of funny, but there's just a little bit of truth to it, and it's not taken quite the way we thought it might be taken? How many times do we need to do that before we begin to learn the lesson of maybe I should do this a little differently than I'm doing it? Unfortunately for most of us, it's one more time than we've already done it. But we can start to ask these questions. Am I being unloving in what I'm doing or saying? Am I being disrespectful in what I'm doing or saying? And by the way, as we go through these, I understand that these are generalizations to some degree, because every man and woman is a little bit different. It's hard to just say all men are this and all women are this, because sometimes that reverses, and I get that. But it's important for us to see we can do better in what we're doing. Another question, as a wife, did I react disrespectfully because I felt unloved? Or as a husband, did I react unlovingly because I felt disrespected? How often do we react in a way and then we excuse it based on how we have felt like we were treated in the first place? We do this in all other aspects of life. We do it with coworkers, we do it with neighbors. How often do we do this with those who we care the most about? Those where that one flesh, that deepest bond is there, because we feel justified in it. I feel like I've been disrespected, so I'm not going to show you the love that you want to be shown, and I'll show you. Or I feel like I'm not loved, and so I'm not going to show you the respect that I know you want, and I'll show you. Do I refuse to say I'm sorry? Two of the biggest words. I love you is right up there at the top of the three-word phrase. Probably the best two-word phrase for us within marriage is I'm sorry. It's a frequent, regular thing that you probably know you should say. Do I refuse to say it? And maybe a secondary question is, if I do refuse to say it, why do I refuse to say it? What is it that holds me back from saying that? Am I too proud to make the first move when it comes to correcting something that has gone the wrong way, when it comes to those foxes running through the vineyards that have taken us in the wrong direction? Do I refuse to be the one who is going to say, all right, I have messed up, I can do better, I want to do better, what should I do to do better? How can I be more loving? How can I be more respectful? What I did, how did you take it, and how could I do that in a better way? Or am I too prideful to say all those things because I feel like I am right? Third, do I justify my lack of respect? It should be lack of respect or love. Do I just sit and talk to myself and say, well, I am completely justified here in what I'm doing. There's nothing wrong with this, and they deserve what I'm doing because of how they've acted. And so I just try to make it all make sense to me. Do any of those reactions improve the situation or the relationship? Okay, if you're going, good answer. If you're going to not be the one to make the first move, not be the one to say you're sorry, if you're going to be the one trying to justify your actions, how is that working out for you? Is it getting you the result you're looking for, or do you find yourself with the relationship just getting more and more difficult, more and more strained? Is it not going where you want it to go? And what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? Why would we do that within our marriages? If we know these things don't work, as satisfying as they might feel for a short period of time, and they do for some crazy reason, maybe Satan is at work in all of this, if we know it doesn't work, why do we keep doing it? How many things in your life, if you knew they did not work, would you just continue to do over and over? And honestly, the answer for a lot of us is probably too many. I had a weed eater for a while that wouldn't start. I would keep going out there about once a week trying to start it as if something had changed. Didn't start. We'll do some dumb things sometimes, but within our relationships, we cannot afford to do that. So never say. I know you're supposed to never say never. Here's some things to never say. Never say, I won't love her until she starts respecting me. I know you wouldn't say this out loud, but sometimes you're thinking it. Or never say, I won't respect him until he starts loving me. This is not, forget marriage for just a minute. This is not what Christians are supposed to do. We don't look at other people and say, all right, as soon as you get your junk together, then I will love you and be kind to you. That's not how this works. Never blame your lack of love on her lack of respect, okay? I would be the most loving husband in the world if she could just learn to respect me. Then it would all be good. Or on the other side, never blame your lack of respect on his lack of love. If he would just love me the way I need to be loved, then I would begin to show respect. And again, the struggle with all of this is exactly what the world is telling you to do. And if you have someone, by the way, that you go to and complain about your marriage, this is exactly what they will tell you. You deserve better. You deserve for them to love you or to respect you the way you should be loved or respected. And as soon as they begin to do that, then you will know it's time for you to. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in any relationship. Why would it work that way here? Jesus teaches us this in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, so whatever you wish that others do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So whatever you wish, that's what you do. Not whatever they're doing, that's what you do. What if the golden rule worked that way? What if it worked in such a way that, okay, we're supposed to be known by our love as Christians, and just as soon as they love us first, then we will get to work on that. Wouldn't work, would it? Why would we try to do that within the most important relationship that we have? So all of these things we look at, as much as I may want to blame someone else, and so often that's where we go to in our marriages, is if they would just get it, if they would just do better. What if instead I look in the mirror and decide, whatever they're doing, good or bad, I'm going to do the best that I can do. I'm going to love the best that I can love. I'm going to respect the best that I can respect. I am going to value this relationship the way that God shows me to value this relationship. What if instead I look at things in that way? In Proverbs 25, it says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver, which is to say, there is a timing to when we say and what we say, isn't there? We talked last time from Ecclesiastes about there being a time for everything. There is a timing to the words that we use, and we must be cautious about that timing. So as we close, and we're going to end a little early tonight. I don't think there will be anybody complain about that. We'll go home and work on our marriages after we leave. It'll all be good. I want to tell you about the 5 love languages. Sometimes I assume as a preacher everybody knows these things, and maybe a lot of you do, but I guarantee you there are a few people here who've never heard of this, or at the very least heard of it 40 years ago and don't remember it right now. The 5 love languages is a book written by Gary Chapman. And it is a very helpful book because, believe it or not, everybody doesn't receive love in the same way that you do. Which is to say, the family you grew up in, there was a way, hopefully, within that family that love was shown. I understand for a lot of families that was a struggle. And sometimes you felt like there was never visible love there and people never said, I love you or whatever. But there were ways most families were trying to show love. And then there are ways that some of us are trained or just geared to receive love. For some, it is gifts. For me, growing up, it was a very unhealthy gift kind of relationship. We found several old home movies that we had we had digitized over the holidays. And as we watched them, we would see these different Christmases of me. And I was not even walking yet, and I'm sitting in one of those, like the early version of a bouncy seat, surrounded by presents at Christmas. I was the only child, I was the only grandchild, it was all for me. And I thought to myself, looking at this thing, I don't have any idea at this age what any of that is. And they've spent so much money and so much time, and here's all this stuff. And what I figured growing up was every Christmas was kind of like that. I got way, way too much stuff at Christmas, which was fun. But what it trained me for was love equals stuff. And so if you love me, what you will do is give me, I should register somewhere before I say this. You'll give me gifts if you love me. And so that's the way I learned to receive love. Now, the struggle is, what I will do sometimes because of that is I will assume, well, what my wife must need then is gifts. And so what I need to do if I'm going to show my love to her is buy her stuff. And what I learned early on is, she likes stuff sometimes, but it's not the same to her. That's not the way she wants to receive love. And so for each of us, as we're in a relationship, we may struggle with this because there is one way you receive love and another way you don't. And I will tell you, a lot of the struggles in a lot of people's marriages that end very early is they don't figure this out. And they really feel like they're showing love, and it's just not coming across. So these love languages, we'll run through real quick, and then we'll close. First of all, words of affirmation. And I will challenge you, by the way, a couple things. One, try as we're going through this to think to yourself, which one is my spouse in this? And some of you know already, and good, more power to you. Some of you may have never considered this. And then the other side of this, by the way, this is not intended to be a guessing game where hopefully you get it right. Talk about this after we leave. And if you know what it is, and especially if you know that your spouse is missing the mark on this, let them know what it is, because they are probably wanting to show you love and would love to show you that in the right way. And especially, by the way, if they think it's gifts and it's not, save them some money in the process and some time. So first of all, words of affirmation, okay? You want positive things said. When you do things well, you want someone to notice you have done things well, and you want them to say that. And too often within marriage, we tend to think those things along the way, but we don't always say them. We just assume that you know, especially guys. Guys are bad about this. So if your wife, her language is words of affirmation, it's important for you to say those things. And for all of us, we know that even if this is not our language, we appreciate when people say those things. It's important for us to say those to each other. Now, this is the one piece of all these languages, by the way, that I would encourage you to do regardless. I think we have a tendency, if we're not careful, to notice negative things. And so when we see positives, it's very important for us to point them out. Second, acts of service. Okay, some people just enjoy having a nice thing done for them. It's not a costly thing, so if your spouse, this is their love language, it's a bonus for you. It costs you nothing financially. It's just a matter of taking your time and doing something. So it's, if one of you does a certain chore around the house all the time, that other person doing that from time to time. If it is one I have done for my wife over the years that I had to give up in Oregon, which is very frustrating. The whole time we lived in Arkansas, I put gas in her car. And I thought, I'll be a man, I'll put gas in the car, you won't have to get that smell on your hand and all of that. And so if I ever noticed her car was getting low, I'd make a point of taking it, putting gas in her car, and I'd sacrifice and do that. We went to Oregon, they pump your gas for you, and it was no fun anymore. But it's little things sometimes a little more significant, but acts of service. Number 3, physical touch. Now, understand this is non-sexual physical touch. And there are some people who just need the hug. There are some people that just need physical contact. And if we have learned nothing since last March, we have figured this one out, have we not? How hard has it been when it is your reflex to reach that hand out for a handshake or to go in for the hug, and you can't do it, or you're not sure if you should do it because you don't know what they're doing right now? And we see that. But within our marriages, don't worry about COVID there. You can have physical touch that is reassuring, good physical touch. Number 4, gifts. For some it is gifts, and we have to just be smart about this. Okay, so you don't have to go above and beyond every time. You do not have to put yourself in debt doing this, but there are small ways with little things, if gifts is the language, that you can make those gifts happen. And then fifth, quality time. And I would imagine, beyond words of affirmation, this is probably the one at the other end of the spectrum that even if this is not the language, this is a very valuable thing for us to give one another. So why do we say all of this? Because if marriage is the building block of society, as we looked at the very beginning, if marriage was God's design for couples from early on, then why would we not want to be proactive and do this as well as we could? If something was wrong with you, and for guys, you got dragged to the doctor or finally talked into going. For everybody else who's smart, you went to the doctor because it's what you're supposed to do. And you get in there and the doctor says to you, this is the thing you need to do to fix this. Then if you don't do it from that point, that's kind of on you. If it's here's the shot you should get, here's the exercise you should do, here's the habit you should change. And for most of us, hopefully we would do those things. If it was a serious life or death kind of thing, and the doctor said to you, if you do this, I can guarantee you, unless there's some sort of an accident or something else that comes along, another 10 years of healthy, good life. If you don't do this thing, you'll be lucky to be here 6 months from now. What would you do? And I think for most of us, we would think, I'm going to do the thing the doctor has told me to do. You're going to be proactive about it. You're going to take care of it. For our marriages, why would we want to just coast along and assume it's going to be fine? Why would we just want to coast along and assume this most important relationship, everything's just going to work the way it should work? We need to be proactive about this as well. So if it's not one of these things, there are 1,000 books on marriages out there, and there's a lot in Scripture about marriage that we can look to learn. And all of it comes back, by the way, to communication. However, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Love, respect, and communication. Don't assume the other person is going to figure this out, especially if you've been married for a good long time and they haven't yet. If they haven't yet, they're not going to, most likely. But you can tell them, and you can begin to work on this together. And wherever your marriage is at right now, if it is the best it has ever been, or if it's really struggling, it can begin to turn back in the right direction just with some simple things like this. I would encourage you to begin working on that today. For those of you who are good examples of marriage here, we are thankful for you. We're thankful that there are people we can look to and see, man, I'd like to have a marriage that's a little more like that, and see the things that you're doing. And for those that are struggling, know that you are not alone. For all the marriages that may look perfect, there are a lot of folks that struggle. And you rarely know until it's so far down the road into that struggle. If you are struggling tonight, it may not be a come up here kind of thing, but let me encourage you to talk with each other and maybe to talk with someone else if you need to. And let me encourage you to take some steps to move back in the right direction. Now, this is not really the invitation kind of sermon, but we will do that anyway. If you are here tonight and you need to respond to Jesus and to the gospel, we would love to see you change your life for him tonight. Or if you have not been the Christian you need to be and you want to change, you've not been the husband or wife that you want to be and you want to be more of that, if there's just something we can pray about for you as your church family, please come while we stand and sing.